The Feudal Future Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Feudal Future Podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And today we are going to continue to unpack, Joel, the swirling changes that we're seeing in the economic and political sphere as a result of all of the moves that President Trump is doing in the United States. And we're going to be focusing on Europe. And to help us do that, we have two really wonderful guests, Veronica De Romanis, who is a professor of economics, European economics in Rome, and Fraser Myers, deputy editor of Spiked, joining us from London. Fraser, Veronica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, thank you.
Would you like to kick us off, Joel?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the question we're interested in starting with is, what has been the impact of the Trump tariff proposals on European governments in general? Veronica, you want to start?
I would say uncertainty, lots of uncertainty, because the tariffs have been introduced, then suspended, then now we have 19 days. We will know what will be the final outcome. So lots of uncertainty, and uncertainty is never good. We know that because people tend to wait, they consume less, they invest less. But when it comes to the European institutions, I think as any crisis that we have seen in the past, this kind of uncertainty has a sort of a positive outcome. It tends to strengthen the 27 economies. So I think there will be a strong response and a response that will be a unique response.
Fraser, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting coming here at it from the UK at the moment, where the British government is very, very keen to downplay any of the impacts. They seem quite confident that they can do a deal with Trump. Keir Starmer, centre-left figure, many of people in his party were, all of about 10 minutes ago telling us that Trump was a fascist, that if he comes on a state visit, they would chain themselves to, the railings to stop it from happening. And now they're rolling out the red carpet, bringing, kind of sucking up to him a bit. They think that they can be, sort of be the Trump whisperers and keep things to a minimum. But of course, Trump is unpredictable. So, on the one hand, you have the British government briefing this week that they're going to do a deal with him on a wide range of things. On the other hand, he comes out with something like, there's going to be tariffs on films made outside of the US. So even something like that is, that's a big business in the UK. The car industry is a massive business. America's one of our biggest exporters. That's being hit. Pharmaceuticals is a big industry for us. That's being hit. But certainly on this side of the English Channel, the government and the political class, it doesn't seem to be in anyone's interest to stir up a lot of fuss, to play the patriotism card against Trump. Slightly different, I think, over in Europe, where they're much more willing to slap on reciprocal tariffs, to say that Europe can compete against America. We know that's not really true. Even the Europeans would admit as much. Mario Draghi wrote a pretty scathing report about the performance of European economy in comparison with America only towards the end of last year. But it has sort of galvanized. As Veronica was saying, it certainly sort of galvanized that feeling that Europe needs to have more autonomy, can't be too dependent on the US, or strategic autonomy, I guess, is the buzzword that keeps being used in European circles. It needs to reindustrialize, which is obviously a big deal. That's a big change on how politics has been discussed.
Well, for the education of our viewers, who are largely American, I wanted to just cover one point off with Veronica and you. The U.S. economy is so consumer-centric. 75% of GDP is based on consumer spending. And of course, if we were in this situation, we would be worried about recession, which we are. Are people going to be less likely to spend? Is that the same concern that dominates economic thinking in Europe? Veronica, we'll start with you.
No, it's exactly the opposite, I would say. In the US, growth has been quite sustained over the past 25 years. The GDP growth rate has been around 2.5% on average, whereas in Europe it has been around 1.2, 1.5. But if we look at what has happened in the US, economic growth has been strongly supported by public spending. The debt to GDP ratio in the US went from 51% in 2001 until 121 nowadays. So it's more than 70 percentage points. In the same 25 years, the euro area, so it's an average, obviously, debt to GDP ratio went from 68 to 86. So it's true that the debt has played a major role. And why so? Because it's easy for the US government to sell its debt because people want to invest in US dollars. So they are ready to buy US debt without asking a very high return in exchange. So it's a sort of a vicious circle. And so the problem in the US, it's not trade deficit, but it's the high debt and the high fiscal deficit. That's why tariff is not the right response. The right solution should be try to reduce excessive demand, not only the private one, but in particular the public one. So in few words, what should be done is a long-term program of spending review, what has been done in the UK, for example, during the Cameron government. So in Europe, we have the opposite situation where internal demand, domestic demand should increase, and in some countries also public demand should increase. And I have in mind Germany. Germany has run a fiscal surplus until the COVID. And nowadays, last year, the debt to GDP ratio was around 62, 63%, which is quite low. The average is 80%, 82% within the European Union. So Germany needs to spend more. Germans need to spend more, but the German government needs to spend more, and it will spend more. So this is a good news, which means that there's going to be more resources that might give a boost to the whole economic performance within the euro area, within the European Union.
So public spending is going to be very important when it comes to Germany and the EU economy. And how will that spill over into the UK? Does the UK have the same balance sheet flexibility to be able to spend more on the public side, or is it going to be kind of just following along in a more of a tepid rate, following what Europe does?
Yeah, I think certainly the view of the British government is there is no room for extra spending or borrowing. They've made some very, very unpopular decisions and cutbacks that are really, really hurting them in the polls in order to try and get the UK's fiscal position under control. I mean, that's their view. They're basically, I think, it being a Labour left-wing government, they're slightly spooked by the fact that the last Labour government left with a very high amount of debt. A lot of people blame them for the broader economic problems that still persist to this day. So there's a sort of positioning game going on there, whether that's actually whether Britain is as fiscally, it's not a particularly fiscally irresponsible country. I think Germany is the key player here. Definitely. The removal of the debt brake marks a massive, massive shift from how German politics has been done for the past few decades, or certainly, the debt brake sort of became part of the constitution. Running these fiscal surpluses was seen as a sort of article of faith, something that, every responsible German government must do. But I think everyone there now agrees that, their infrastructure is crumbling. Contrary to popular belief, German trains do not run on time, and people are worried about the rearmament of Germany. But they were in a situation where essentially soldiers were being made to train with broomsticks. So they're starting from a very low base on that front. And also a lot of the sort of money that's earmarked for what is called military will actually be redirected to the car industry. The car industry has taken a hammering from net zero, a hammering from China, They want to repurpose a lot of car factories for armaments, for making tanks, things like that. So a lot of the more military talk is actually it has a lot to do with reviving Europe's economy. It's kind of Keynesian sort of stimulus program, I think, rather than something to be too concerned about as a sort of serious military force.
But what I wonder about, and I'd be interested, both of you, on this is, obviously we're moving away from the EV mandates, and obviously we're now the world's biggest oil producer, and we're going to be producing more oil than we know what to do with, probably.
Except in California.
Except in California, where we import the oil from other countries, which is a whole nother. California is like a different planet, not a different country. But what I'm wondering about is, will it be possible for Europe to keep its net zero commitments and still be competitive?
Joel, yes, I'll answer to your question right now. Can I just add something that was said by Fraser on Germany? I think it's very important, the removal of that brake, even though it's temporary. So it's not a huge revolution. It's just that the new government is convinced that without increasing government expenditure, the German economy will turn into a recession. So there is a need to invest more, but not only on defense. Actually, the big portion of new investments will be on infrastructures, new hospitals, new schools, technology, tech sector, which is, there's a huge gap in the German economy. So that, I think, is very important. They will invest not only on defense, but in infrastructure and in technology and in research. So when it comes to your question, Joel, yeah, that's going to be hard. They try to do it, but the goal, the program of the second mandate of Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, is to have a much more gradual approach, not as stringent as the one that they have followed during the first mandate. So she has understood, but not only Ursula von der Leyen, all the commissioners are totally aware that being too strict, having a plan which is too stringent, it's not going to be a good idea, also from a political point of view.
So if you listen to the Trump logic, and I'm really looking forward to your opinion on this, when it comes to tariffs, the idea here is we're going to need to increase spending to be able to improve infrastructure, to be able to, help the country grow. And we really can't get that out of income taxes. That if we increase tariffs, net, we're going to generate tremendous amounts of money coming into the United States from these tariffs. Where are the holes in that logic?
I don't know if you use the word logic.
Okay, the short answer is that you cannot solve through tariffs the twin deficits. U.S. has a fiscal deficit and a trade deficit. So if you impose tariffs and your goal is to increase revenues, because a tariff is a tax, basically tax that you're imposing on consumers, if you want to get revenues and hence and therefore reduce your debt, imports should not decline. So either you have a reduction on your debt or you have a reduction on your trade deficit. You can't have both. That's why tariff is not the right solution. That's why the solution should be to decrease domestic demand, private and public.
So austerity has never been a popular strategy in the United States. And that's one of the issues that we're facing, that culturally has been very difficult to sell that to the American public.
But I would also add, and I'd like to get Fraser on this as well, is that being an American, seeing what's here, I mean, the big problem that the real motivation, Trump says anything and, he'll lie and then he'll go on to another lie. So I don't take what he says very seriously. But what I think is driving this is the sense that the country has become much too dependent, particularly on China, for almost everything. I recall during COVID, we couldn't get masks. The United States of America, the most powerful country in the history of the world, can't make masks for medical purposes. And I had to call a friend who happens to live in Leeds, who had a cousin in Shenzhen who was making masks. So I became very popular because they sent me a big consignment of masks. That, I think, is what's driving us as much as anything else, is a sense that we can't build submarines without Chinese parts. We can't. So the idea is to figure a way of reindustrializing the country. I mean, clearly, when it comes to cutting edge stuff, we almost always are ahead. But when that technology becomes commoditized, we tend to lose control. So I think, does Europe have a similar situation? I mean, I assume that if you, let's say, go to EVs, you're going to end up dependent on China.
Or if Germany is going to rearm itself and build tanks,
right?
Where are the screws going to come from?
Exactly.
Are they going to come from Germany? Are they going to come from China? Which is your issue on the strategic vulnerability side. Right. But I completely understand Veronica's argument about this is, if you get past the strategic side and you look at, not wanting to increase the costs of manufacturing by putting tariffs on top of things, and that will make you more competitive if you can produce a product less expensively. Does that cancel out the strategic side? So I don't know, where does this mix of strategic versus economic fall in Europe and the UK?
Fraser?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant sort of tussle. I mean, we obviously have similar problems with China. Each government changes its mind as to what its attitude to China should be. Currently, the current government is more China friendly. I think I can't remember which Trump aide denounced us as cucks to the Communist Party, which I think is a bit far. But that's their way with words, I guess. A previous government was sort of trying to wean us off China, but China is such a dominant player. It's such a dominant player in technology, in particular. We struggle to build a nuclear power plant without Chinese help. We struggle to build the 5G mobile internet network without Chinese help. There is obviously a sense that our industry is going to China, and I think so many people in Europe, I guess, are a bit baffled that other Western countries are being sort of targeted in this sense. We sort of think that we're on the same side. We have the same problems. We also, in Europe, and there's similar conversations, we also know that there are many shared reasons why we're also not competitive enough, whether that's to do with the cost of energy, over-regulation, things like that. There are many sort of shared solutions to these problems that we should both be pursuing. So I think, a lot of people in the West think, well, they're especially on the sort of right in the West and in Europe, thinking we should have been allied in the same fight rather than being targeted for tariffs.
Yeah. What's your sense on this, Veronica? This balance between strategic and economic?
I agree with what Fraser had just said, and I would like also to add demographics. Mm-hmm. This is a huge challenge, and if we look at the numbers, it's really, I mean, we should start addressing this challenge right now. And I have the impression that European governments think that you still have time to address these issues. And we don't have time. If we look at the data, the number of children per woman has decreased over the past 20 years. This is an average Euro number, from 1.8 to 1.3. In the US is a little bit higher, although it's also declining
about
in the US.
1.6, 1.7.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And plus, in the European Union, there are huge differences among countries. You have France, which a much higher number, and then you have Italy. Italy is one of the lowest number, 1.01. So that is it's going to be a huge problem in terms of pensions and also in terms of sustainability of public finances. So who's going to repay the debt? Who's going to produce wealth in the future? So, and who's going to be productive and being able to acquire all the new competences that will come from a digital transition or the green transition? So demographics to me is the number one priority that governments should address.
I agree with you. By the way, China is facing a similar issue, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting element of that kind of comes back to the culture of technology. We've been fed a argument that basically says, well, we're not going to need all these people anyway because we have AI that's going to be coming in. So if we are, extraordinarily fecund and we have a lot of children, we're not going to really have jobs for them. So we might as well not. That's a very interesting element, in addition to the fact that we then focus on an area that Joel is near and dear to Joel's heart, which is if you have children, you can't afford to actually, house them because the cost of housing is so expensive. But getting back to that cultural question, how do you feel is that plays in Europe? Is the general feeling that technology is going to obviate the need for people working anyway, so why have them?
No, I totally disagree. I think that we still need more people. Why? Because we live longer. So we live longer. Life expectancy is quite high in Europe, actually much higher than in the US. The average is 81 years, whereas in the US is 76. And if you live longer, you need more resources. You need more people being able to help you. So that's why you need an increase in the workforce.
But let me ask, and because I think this is a big issue here, and even maybe more so in Europe, the solution has been, let's bring in people from the developing world, and that would solve the problem. It doesn't seem to have solved the problem, right?
Well, in Italy, and I would say also in other European countries, the solution would be to increase female unemployment rate. In Italy, one woman out of two is unemployed. So that means that not only we are wasting human capital, but we're going to have lots of, old women without a pension, and women live longer. So
and without any children to help them either.
Exactly. So increasing female employment rate to me is the solution, is the problem, the low female employment rate, and at the same time, the solution.
But what about the impact of migration? That seems to have driven a lot of European politics. So, I mean, Merkel's opening up Germany, I don't think is widely appreciated in Germany today. I mean, what's your sense, Fraser? And I know the UK also has some serious issues, as does Canada, which is another story.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is there was Merkel's opening up of the borders 10 years ago, but there has been a sort of similarly large wave post-COVID. I think a lot of governments panicked that suddenly there are all these worker shortages because many migrants went home during the lockdowns, and then in the UK, certainly, they didn't come back. So there was a big panic. We tried to get in as many people as possible. At one point, there was 1 year after COVID when we let in 1.2 million people, which is, the size of Birmingham. And, to get on to that other issue you mentioned, housing, we are not building 1.2 million houses for these people to come to. So it feels as if migration is not all bad, of course, but it's been so badly mismanaged. There's been such a huge increase in such a short period of time. and that's just legal migration. Then you have the sort of illegal migration where, not just people turning up on the south coast of Europe, but now people turning up on the south coast of England, coming from France via the English Channel. People are baffled by this. People are baffled as to why it's a matter for the British government to house them while their sort of claims are processed. People are shocked at how many people are granted the right to remain in the UK, often despite committing crimes or seemingly having no real grounds for asylum. So it's obviously creating a huge amount of resentment that's leading to a huge political backlash. It is, in the English polls, certainly here in Britain, migration is the number one issue, even more so than the economy. I mean, ironically, that's partly because we have an increasing number of people who are either elderly or, very tragically here, people are being signed off sick on benefits. The official unemployment rate is extremely low, and it always has been in the UK for the past 10 years. But, we have around 1 in 4 people claiming some sort of disability benefit. You have, I think, around, whole towns in the north of England where people are just wasting their lives away, not appearing in the official unemployment figures, but claiming disability payments. And so, weirdly, they're not actually affected by how the economy goes up and down. They're not noticing the economic stagnation so much, but they are noticing migration. They are noticing that their hospitals are full. They are noticing that it's impossible to rent a house and things like that. So there's a lot of kind of trends, quite dark trends, that are rubbing up against each other, unfortunately.
Well, and to Veronica's point, if you have low workforce participation, who is going to actually generate the tax revenue that's going to cover all of these social expenses? It's going to be very, very difficult. So how is that playing out on continental Europe, Veronica?
Well, I agree, and you need money in order to integrate these people. Merkel spent almost 20 billion euro in order to integrate all these people who were mainly arriving from Syria. But I think, I agree with Fraser. There was a problem of stock and flow. There was too many people in a short period of time. But we have to remember what Angela Merkel said back then. She said, "Wir schaffen das." We can do it. We are a strong economy, and because of her past, she's the leader from the eastern part of Europe. She said, "I know what it means living in a regime without freedom. So we have to open our doors." So this is what she said, but unfortunately, too many people arrived at the same time. But it's also, I would say, a positive story, because last year the data showed that out of 1,500,000 people who arrived, 80% have a job, are fluent in Germany, and are perfectly integrated in the German society. So they produce revenues, they pay pensions. So I think the important thing is to invest in integration. What we don't do in Italy is exactly spending on integration, because from a political point of view, it's complicated to explain. Let me add one more thing. When Angela Merkel decided to open the doors, a new party became very, very popular. And this new party is Alternative für Deutschland, AfD. And AfD started campaign at the very beginning saying we have to leave the Europe. But after the open door policy launched by Angela Merkel, they started campaign against migration, against people asking for asylum, for asylum. So, and it became very, very, very popular.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think the immigration issue was probably the number one issue that got Trump elected.
It certainly helped.
And the positive side of how immigrants contribute is not getting across here in the United States. It's the issues that Fraser is bringing up of people who are coming in who are, criminals or are economically ungrounded and are basically a suck on the system is the narrative that we're seeing most in the United States. So I think we need to somehow broaden out the positive side if we're going to create some balance. So I appreciate you bringing that out.
But a lot of it has to do with management because for some bizarre reason, Biden decided to open the border. And what do you think is going to happen? You're going to get some of the immigrants who work really hard, but you're going to get criminals and you're going to get, people that you're going to have to support. I mean, the state of California is providing free medical care to the undocumented at a time when the state has a huge deficit. So,
well, I agree that that's crucial. I agree that a big portion of Syrians who arrived in Germany were, let's say, highly educated, were engineers, doctors. But it's also true that the government decided to invest, to spend money, to allow them to be able to be fluent in German, which is very important. To have an apartment, to find a job immediately. So that, at the end, it helps, it works. So we see the results right now. In Italy, for example, in the Southern European countries, it's more difficult because you have people arriving from the Mediterranean. And I mean, the portion of doctors and engineers is 0.0001%. So you need a lot of money. And as I said before, it's not easy to explain that to the population, especially in a high debt country like Italy, where right now we are in a sort of a austerity phase. The government is cutting expenditures, not increasing expenditures. So if you say to your voters, "Oh, we're going to increase spending on migration," it's not going to be very popular.
Yeah. Well, as we reach the end of our program, I would love to get your thoughts on the state of the divide. You both talked about how we're on both sides of the Atlantic, we're experiencing similar problems economically, demographically, politically. And yet we have this new style with the Trump regime, which basically accuses everybody of having ripped off the United States for the past 50 years in a very insulting and adversarial kind of a way. We had some prominent Canadian journalists on that saying you basically insulted us personally, and it's going to take a long time for that to come back.
And by the way, my wife's Canadian, so I hear it all the time.
So the state of diplomacy may be finding a new low, but I'd love to know what you guys think. How is that experienced in Europe? Is there a rift? Is the rift permanent? If there is a rift, what's your feeling?
And how would we resolve it?
Right.
It's experienced differently by different people. So if you take lots of people in Europe will remember J.D. Vance's speech that he gave to the Munich Security Conference. And he basically laid into the entire European establishment saying, you're not Democrats. You're trying to crush populist parties through underhand means. You're crushing free speech. People aren't allowed to speak their minds. Now, everyone in the room was absolutely horrified by that. And even, one of the leaders of the conference ended up crying a few days later because he knew that the sort of Atlantic alliance was coming apart. But if you talk to working class people in Britain, in France or in Germany, they think, yeah, well, J.D. Vance was right. I agree with him. This is our elites are anti-democratic. They don't let me speak my mind. They could have me arrested at any moment for tweeting something. So there's definitely a divide on that front. I think that the European leaders did need to have their feathers ruffled. I think the question remains to be seen, as to whether are they going to take their own defense seriously? Are they going to actually take the economy seriously? There's been so much drift on that question for so long. Or is what we're seeing now just mere rhetoric and posturing? That I think is going to be the question. But certainly it has lit a firecracker beneath them in a way that might actually turn out for the best.
Veronica, last word for you.
Okay, so the story that Trump is telling is sort of he tells just one part of the story. You were mentioning before the meeting with Mark Carney, and Trump said, we are giving subsidies to Canada. Okay, imports are not subsidies. It's not a gift. You are paying money, but in exchange, you are getting back goods and services. So if you present imports like a subsidy, it's obvious that then the other people are the one to blame, are the parasites. So you have to explain that it's not a subsidy. This is the wrong narrative. It's I'm paying for something in exchange. So that's first point. Second point, Fraser was mentioning J.D. Vance in Munich. Well, in Italy, the prime minister has really appreciated the words that J.D. Vance pronounced in Munich. Giorgia Meloni said, he was right. He said that Europe is sort of losing its values. But at the same time, when it comes to economics, she has to be much more cautious and prudent because Italy is an export-led economy. So we are running a trade surplus. So tariffs will be very, very painful for us. So she's sort of in the middle. She's acknowledged the fact that Trump and J.D. Vance share the same kind of conservative political approach, but on the other hand, she understands that it's very important for Italy to stay within the European Union and try to avoid tariffs because we're going to pay a very, very high price.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Veronica and Fraser, for giving us your perspectives, and this is turning into a very fulsome, interesting realignment of forces and economic power. And I really appreciate your perspectives on all of that.
And I just can't resist after Veronica's last comment. The funniest comment on the J.D. Vance stuff and the speech was our good friend Ambassador Spogli said, "We live in a bizarre time where the only people who believe in free speech are the fascists."
And with that, we'll wrap it up and thank you again for being part of the Feudal Future podcast.
Thanks.
The Feudal Future.